Hey guys, it's Hunter with Tactics. I'm here going to show you how to set up your first board. So you just got your new snowboard, you picked out some sweet bindings, you're going to need the base plates, the hardware, the screwdriver, and tape measure. This is everything you need to set up your very first board. And so let's get started. Okay, so first things first, you need to figure out what stance you are. If you've never ridden a board at all and you don't know what your stance is, a good way to figure it out is to have a friend come up behind you a few times and give you a shove when you're not expecting it. Whichever foot you constantly catch yourself with is your dominant foot, and you're going to want that to be your leading foot on your board. So me, I would catch myself with my left foot. My left foot is my dominant leg, so I'm putting it forward. This is a regular stance. If you're catching yourself with your right leg all the time, this is your dominant leg, and so this will be your goofy stance. So now that we've figured out what our stance is, it's time to figure out how far apart we want our feet on the board. Most alpine riders like to have their feet narrow, while most progressive riders like to have a wider stance for stability, for landings and jibbing, so you can have a lot of board control. So a good way to figure out what is going to work for you is to just step onto the board with your feet pretty close together, right under your shoulders, and just keep moving them apart just until they're just slightly past your shoulders and you feel a little comfortable. You want it to be more comfortable to have your knees bent than to have straight leg. So when your feet are close together, you're going to want to stand straight, turn the board like this. That's not good. You want to have a little bit wider stance so it feels more natural to have your knees bent, so you're going to be initiating your turns with your shoulders instead of your hips. This is a good stance for a progressive rider, and it's going to help you as you learn. Okay, so now that you've got your feet in a place that feels pretty comfortable, you want to measure them to see exactly how far your width is. This is about where I like to ride, so get out your tape measure. All right, measure from the center of your foot to the center of your other foot. And mine is about 21.5 inches. So I've got a 21.5 inch stance. So now that we know our width and our stance, it's time to talk a little bit about setback. What setback is when you're in the deep snow, it's kind of hard work to keep the nose of your board from going into the POW. So what a lot of people do is put a lot of weight on their back leg, which in turn fatigues your leg, and then you're tired and you're not having fun on the mountain anymore. So to compensate for this, what some people do is they move their bindings back towards the tail of the board so that their weight is back here on the board and it lifts the nose out of the snow for a nice float through the powder. Since this is your first board, we're just going to go with a centered stance. But once you progress and start moving into the deep stuff, you know what setback is, and you know how to keep your nose out of the snow. So now that you know your stance width, it's time to put the bindings on the board. So get your tape measure out again, set your bindings on the board where you think roughly you want them, and then measure it out. From the center of one binding to the center of the next binding is how you measure your width. Like what I said before, I'm 21.5. So I'm just going to move this over a little bit, and bang, 21.5. So this is my stance. Now it's time to figure out how to mount the base plates and figure out your angles. Okay, so now that you know which holes you want to mount in, and you've figured out your stance width, it's time to figure out the angles. What a lot of people do is what's called a duck stance, where your bindings are facing away from each other. Like I said before, with the narrow stance, some alpine carve riders like to have their bindings facing the same way, but we're just going to focus on progressive riding, so we're going to do a duck stance. What I like to ride is, and what I suggest, is no more than 15 degrees on the rear foot. Otherwise, you're going to put unnecessary strain on your knees, and they're going to be fatigued and tired, and after years of snowboarding, your knees are going to blow out and it's going to suck. So no more than 15 degrees on the back, maybe 18 if you're feeling wild. Some people ride bigger than that, but it's really whatever's comfortable. I don't recommend going too big. The front foot's a little bit more open. Some people like to have 0 on the back and a really drastic angle on the front. What I ride is 15 on the back, 18 on the front. I find that it's a good mellow duck that gives me control when I'm going switch and regular. So for this part, you'll need your hardware and your screwdriver. You can see here I've got the binding pushed all the way towards the toe edge of the board. My boot is going to drag in the snow and it's going to lift my edge out of the snow, and I'm going to eat it if I try and make a hard toe side turn. So what I need to do is just slide this back so it's more centered on the board. I've got plenty of room here for my boots to hang over the toe, and I've got room for my heel here on the heel side. So that way when I'm turning the board, I'm not going to be dragging my heel, I'm not going to be dragging my toe. I'm always going to have the edge of my board touching the snow and nothing else. Alright, so now that our bindings are centered on the board, we have our angles adjusted, we have our width figured out, and we're in the correct stance, regular or goofy. It's time to tighten up the bindings. Make sure you get them really, really tight, because there's lots of vibration when you're snowboarding and they'll tend to unscrew themselves over time. It might be a good idea to even go get a bonding agent like Loctite to put on the threads when you put them in there to really lock them down once you've figured out what stance you like. Alright, so now that our bindings are mounted on the board, it's another thing that we can adjust is the angle of the high back. Again, this has a lot to do with what type of riding you do. If you're just a beginner or you like to ride a lot of park, I definitely suggest having 0 degree high back, so they're as far back as they'll go. It's really good. It's a really good stance. It's really forgiving, especially if you're learning or trying to land jumps. If you're really aggressive and into big high mountain or half pipe, a lot of riders like to have a more angled forward high back, and what that does is it forces your knees to be bent and puts you into a more aggressive stance. Alright, the way that you adjust the high back is there's this slider here on the back of most bindings, and I'm just going to tilt it forward, slide it down so it's locked at the angle that I like, and then take my screwdriver and tighten it up. There we go. My high back is at a nice steep angle, so if I was riding half pipe, I would be set. Alright, you got your bindings mounted and your board's all set up. You're ready to go get on the hill. As you learn, you'll want to make lots of adjustments. The only way to figure out what setup works for you is to make tweaks. So as you're learning, move your bindings around, change your width, change your angles, play with your high backs. You can adjust the strap length for your boots. There's all sorts of things you can do to dial in your bindings just right, and the only way to figure out what works for you is experimentation. So as you're learning, make sure that you're making adjustments and keeping track of what's working and what isn't. Other than that, go on the hill, have fun, go out with your friends. Everything you see here is available on tactics.com. Give us a call.